Lecture 7. The theme is phraseology, phraseological units or idioms. The plan of the lecture: phraseology, phraseological units or idioms. Principles of classification. Semantic classification of phraseological units. Structural classification of phraseological units. Syntactical classification of phraseological units. Phraseological units or idioms. The vocabulary of a language is enriched not only by words but also by phraseological units. Phraseological units are word groups that cannot be made in the process of speech. They exist in the language as ready-made units. They are stable word groups characterized by a completely or partially transferred meaning and compiled in special dictionaries. The same as words, phraseological units express a single notion and are used in a sentence as one part of it. American and British lexicographers call such units idioms. We can mention such dictionaries as Smith's Words and Idioms, Collins, A Book of English Idioms, and etc. In these dictionaries we can find words peculiar in their semantics or idiomatic, side by side with word groups and sentences. In these dictionaries they are arranged as a rule into different semantic groups. Idioms are widely used in standard spoken and written English today and can be defined as established and essential speech units with fixed and constant structures. An idiom is a combination of words that has a meaning that is different from the meanings of the individual words themselves. It is a phrase which does not always follow the normal rules of meaning and grammar. The famous linguist McMurdy says that many idioms are examples of strong collocations. For example, it is difficult to say why spill the beans should mean to give away secret information. The words and the grammar that make up this idiom are almost impossible to change without changing the meaning. So, for example, to sit on the fence can literally mean that one is sitting on a fence. However, the idiomatic meaning of this phrase is that one is not making a clear choice regarding some issue. Many idioms are unique and fixed in their grammatical structure. The expression to sit on the fence cannot become to sit on a fence or to sit on the fences. So phraseological units or idioms are, as they are called by most Western scholars, represent the most colorful and expressive part of the language's vocabulary. It reflects that the nation's customs, facts, traditions of the past history. For example, dark horse, actually not a horse, but a person about whom no one knows anything definite, and so one is not sure what can be expected from him. It is connected with the British tradition to go horse races, and a bit as to what horse can win the race. Often the race is won by an unknown horse, hence the expression dark horse. For example, a white elephant. A white elephant is not a person, but a valuable object which involves great expense or trouble for its owner, out of all proportion to its usefulness or value, and which is also difficult to dispose of. This phrase came from interesting story when the king Siam presented such elephants to the people whom he wanted to ruin because it was very expensive to have these animals in the household. Principles of classification. As for it, the items can be classified on the basis of different principles. The traditional and the oldest principle for classification is based on their original content, and it might be termed as thematic. On this principle, they are classified according to their sources of origin, referring to different spheres of human activity, life of nature, natural phenomena, and etc. Professor Smith distinguishes items connected with the sea, agriculture, wild and domestic animals, art, and etc. For example, in deep waters means in trouble. Couch potato, about a man who spends a lot of time watching television. Crocodile tears, insincere tears for effect only, etc. and etc. So, English idioms have many colloquial expressions with parts of human body. They are called somatic phrases. For example, face to face means person to person. To lose one's head, it means panic, lose control. Under one's nose, it means very close, easily noticed. And the next, easy on the eye, it means pleasant to look at, and etc. So in modern linguistics, there is considerable confusion about the terminology associated with these word groups. Most Russian scholars use the term phraseological unit, which was first introduced by academician Vinogradov. There are many phraseological units, and the differences between them are also a lot. That's why it is important to say that phraseological units or idioms have different classifications based on their phraseology, have been described by many authors. The most comprehensive are the doctoral theses of Amosova and Kunin. The detailed groups are given in the books on English idioms by Smith and Ball. The most significant theories advanced for Russian phraseology are those by Vinogradov. Semantic classification of phraseological units. Phraseological units can be classified according to the degree of motivation of their meaning. This classification was suggested by academician Vinogradov for Russian phraseological units. He pointed out three types of phraseological units: phraseological combinations, phraseological unities, and phraseological fusions. So, phraseological combinations are word groups with a partially changed meaning. They may be said to be clearly motivated, that is, the meaning of the unit can be easily deduced from the meaning of its constituents. For example, to have a bite, to be a good hand at something, bitter truth, swam neck, dog's life, to skate on thin ice. Phraseological unities are word groups with a completely changed meaning. For example, meaning of the unit does not correspond to meanings of its constituent parts. They are motivated units where the meaning of the whole unit can be guessed from the meanings of its components, but it is transferred, metaphorical or metonymical. For example, to play the first fiddle means to be a leader in something, and to stick to one's word means to promise. Old salt means experienced sailor. To lose one's heart to somebody, it means to fall in love. Collocations where words are combined in their original meaning, but their combinations are different in different languages. For example, cash and carry, self-service shop, in a big way. means in great degree, and etc. So phraseological fusions are word groups with completely changed meanings. They are not motivated units. We cannot guess the meaning of the whole from the meanings of its components. These phrases are highly idiomatic and cannot be translated word for word into other languages. For example, a white feather to cut somebody dead means to rudely ignore somebody or to pretend not to know or recognize him. A skeleton in the cupboard means a shameful or dangerous family secret. And red tape means bureaucratic methods. To come a cropper means to come to a disaster. Structural classification of phraseological units. Professor Smirnitsky worked out structural classification of phraseological units, comparing them with words. He points out one top units which he compares with derived words because derived words have only one root morpheme. He points out two top units which he compares with compound words because in compound words we usually have two root morphemes. Among one top units he points out three structural types. So, units of the type means to give up. Here, verbs plus postposition type. For example, to add up, to back up, to drop out, to nose out, to buy into, to sandwich in, and etc. The next, units of the type means to be tied. Some of these units remind the passive voice in their structure, but they have different prepositions with them, while in the passive voice we can have only prepositions by or with. For example, to be tired of, to be interested in, to be surprised at, and etc. And the next C is prepositional, means nominal phraseological units. These units are equivalents of unchangeable words. They are prepositions, conjunctions, adverbs. That is why they have no grammar center. Their semantic center is the nominal part. For example, on the doorstep, quite near means and on the nose means exactly. In the course of, on the stroke of, on time, in time, on the point of, and etc. Among two top units, Smirnitsky points out the following structural types. A. Attributive nominal, such as a month of Sundays, grey matter, a millstone round one's neck, and many others. Units of this type are noun equivalents and can be partly or perfectly idiomatic. In partly idiomatic units or phrasemes, sometimes the first component is idiomatic. For example, high road. In other cases, the second component is idiomatic. For example, first night. In many cases, both components are idiomatic. For example, red tape, blind alley, bed of nail, shot in the arm, and many others. And the next B is verb nominal, phraseological units. For example, to read between the lines, to sweep under the carpet, and etc. The grammar center of such units is the verb. The semantic center in many cases is the nominal component. For example, to fall in love. In some units, the verb is both the grammar and the semantic center. For example, not to know the ropes. These units can be perfectly idiomatic as well. For example, to burn one's boat, to vote with one's feet, to take to the cleaners, etc. And the next is phraseological repetitions such as now or never, part and parcel, country and western, and etc. Such units can be built on antonyms, for example, ups and downs, back and forth. Often they are formed by means of alliteration. For example, cakes and ale, as busy as a bee. Syntactical classification of phraseological units. Phraseological units can be classified as parts of speech. This classification was suggested by Arnold. Here we have the following groups. A. Non-phraseologisms denoting an object, a person, a living being. For example, a dog's life, a big shot, red brick university, green beret. B. Verb phraseologisms denoting an action, a state, a feeling. For example, to break the lodge, to rain cats and dogs, to be on the beam, to nose out, to make headlines. And the next C, adjective phraseologisms denoting a quality. For example, loose as a goose, safe and sound, as thin as a rail, high and mighty. D. Adverbs, phraseological units such as with a bump, in the soap, like a dream, like a dog, with two tails. And the E. Preposition phraseological units, for example, in the course of, on the stroke of. And the next is F. Interjection phraseological units, that is, catch me, well, I never, take it easy, and etc. In Arnold's classification, there are also sentence equivalents, proverbs, sayings, and quotations. For example, the sky is the limit. What makes him tick? I'm easy. The classification system of phraseological units suggested by Professor Kunin is the latest outstanding achievement in the Russian theory of phraseology. This classification is based on the combined structural semantic principle and subdivided into 4 classes. Nominative phraseological units are represented by word groups, including the ones with one meaningful word. For example, where and tear, well and good. And the nominative communicative phraseological units include word groups of type. For example, to break the ice is broken. That is, verbal word groups are transformed into a sentence when the verb is used in the passive voice. Phraseological units include interjectional word groups. Communicative phraseological units are represented by proverbs and sayings. These 4 classes are divided into subgroups according to the type of structure of the phraseological units. The classification system includes a considerable number of subtypes and the gradations, and objectively reflects the wealth of types of phraseological units existing in the language. It is based on scientific and modern criteria and represents an earnest attempt to take into account all the relevant aspects of phraseological units and combine them within the borders of the classification system. Now consider your answers to the following. Ways of forming phraseological units. What are they? What is the thematic classification of phraseological units? Semantic classification of phraseological units. Structural classification of phraseological units. Syntactical classification of phraseological units. And the classification system suggested by Professor Kunin. Now be ready to answer to the following questions.